and get a coffee, you are welcome to do that as well. And we are live streaming this for our friends who were not able to join us in person. Okay, can you all fit? Sorry, the table's a little tight, but hopefully it will be a good fit. So glad to be together on this beautiful fall day as the next installation in the 200th anniversary celebration of St. Mary's. And I want to say a special thanks to Sarah Marco Forrest, who was the inspiration behind this wonderful panel idea. And she did all of the work to put it together. And so we're very grateful, Sarah, for your attention to one of the many, many ways that St. Mary's history is to be celebrated. And so the celebration is continuing this whole year from our birthday that was in July. We started at Pentecost, and then we're going until the next spring and the next Pentecost. This recognition that you shouldn't celebrate your birthday just once a year, but that a big year like 200 is one that we can celebrate in many other ways. So thank you all for being with us. It is so good to be together. I'd like us to open with a prayer that comes from one of our Episcopal resources, the United Thank Offering. Some of us were at Diocesan Convention yesterday, and this is a long collection of funds that go to the Episcopal Church women's work. And so there's a beautiful prayer that someone wrote called Breath of God. At the beginning of time, God breathed a great breath. All that is was contained in that breath and exploded into existence. The Spirit of God continues to breathe life into being. We breathe in that breath of God, and we breathe out words of comfort to the brokenhearted, words of peace to the troubled, words of hope to those in need, words of justice to the suffering, words of joy to the grieving, words of freedom to the oppressed, words of light to those in darkness. The Spirit of God breathes one long eternal breath. We know that breath. Its name is love. We join the dance of that divine breath and sing words of praise, thanksgiving, and everlasting joy. Amen. Amen. So we have microphones at the table, and if you just push the buttons on each one, that will turn it on, and we can just leave them on as we pass the mic back and forth. So hopefully everyone had a chance to look at people's bios in the bulletin this week. But we wanted to start out with a chance for everyone to share a little bit more fulsomely about their story of St. Mary's. And advocacy, activism, and service. We added, at first, we just had the idea of an activism panel. And then we later, as we pondered it more, added these words advocacy and added the word service to better encompass kind of the depth and the breadth of some ways we walk in love in the world and live out God's justice. And so I'd love for each person to speak a little bit. And Nokimis, I'd love for you to begin because you were here the first of this group. So if you turn your mic on, perfect.
Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to say how wonderful it is and how appreciative I am of being asked. St. Mary's is my Philadelphia home. I moved here in 1967, fresh out of school and too dumb to know about any dangers, which was really a very smart thing. I came to take a job at the Episcopal Community Services, which instantly threw me into the world of our church people, and very shortly after became a member of St. Mary's. It was at the height of activism everywhere, but particularly in Philadelphia. John Scott, the rector, was very involved in the civil rights movement that was going on, and quite heated. Many times a call came through to his wife, Fran. The rectory was right next door. I'm in jail. And he was in jail with several other priests and lay people who had taken a step in one direction or the other towards guaranteeing and trying to assure civil rights. And that was my initiation into actually being an activist. There was so much activity just a few blocks away in Mantua. And there was a joke that circulated around St. Mary's that you could identify the FBI agents because they were trying to look so cool with plaid shirts and wingtip shoes. St. Mary's was in the middle of all of that. It was also the first place to open up, I believe, in this city to have a mass for the gays. The mass was right over in that chapel once a week. Maybe Jim remembers more. But Jim was in seminary when I moved here, so I've known him just that long. Gino's, which was the jazz club in the basement, was also another wonderful way that St. Mary's reached out to a group of young musicians who were looking for a place to play their music, and it became a popular night spot in West Philadelphia. I could go on forever, but I don't want to leave out the fact that the seminary, the Episcopal Seminary, was right down the street, and the wealth of theological minds that we had access to at St. Mary's certainly shaped my faith and shaped my Christianity. And John was very, very gracious in offering his pulpit for those priests who were teachers at the seminary and otherwise would not have had possibly as availability as they did. So it's been a wonderful journey. We left in just before 1980 and moved far enough away that coming back with two little guys made it difficult. But we stayed at St. Mary's 8 years after we moved because we just couldn't imagine any other place like St. Mary's. So thank you again.
David, would you go next?
Good afternoon. The rector told us we should make notes, so we didn't go past our 5 minutes. So I'm just going to read my notes. St. Mary's came into my life in 1976 when I was hired as the first parish administrator. Previous to that, they had been called secretary. I'll leave it to your own imagination why they changed the name. I had been involved in a variety of advocacy causes on the Penn campus since 1970 when I entered as a freshman. In those days, the Christian Association, also known as the CA, at 36th and Locust, was a hotbed of left-wing activism, so I naturally gravitated there both as a student and after I graduated in 1974. St. Mary's Parish office was at the CA in those days, not at the church. It was at the CA that I got to know Father John Scott, St. Mary's rector. Sometime in 1976, Father Scott offered me the job of parish secretary. What happened to be just at that time, that happened to be just at the time that I came out to myself as a gay man. In addition to a lot of other progressive causes, the CA was also home to two nascent gay organizations, Gays at Penn and Gay Peer Counseling, both of which continue to this day. Their office was right next door to the St. Mary's office, so I got to know a lot of gay and lesbian people at just the right time since I had just come out. I should note that I became something of an important cog in the progressive machine on campus around that time, not because I was an especially good activist, but because I was a master at using the mimeograph machine, especially when it came to electronic stencils. St. Mary's became a hotbed of progressive causes of all types, but most notable to me was its work supporting gay men and lesbian women who hung out at the CA. Probably our most visible activity, in addition to women and gay priests at the altar, was that we co-sponsored two annual gay cultural festivals in 1978 and 1979 that attracted a lot of attention and was put on over 2 years and had almost 20 performances, plays, lectures, and other presentations. St. Mary's made the news by obtaining a $1,000 state grant to support the festival, which was an amazing accomplishment at the time. With the intense anti-gay advocacy in those days, often led by conservative churches, the media loved the idea of a church giving money to a gay and lesbian festival. I also was part of a group that included your own Scott Wilds in establishing the first real advocacy organization of LGBTQ people in Philadelphia, called the Philadelphia Lesbian and Gay Task Force, which became one of the most successful gay rights organizations in the nation and continued to operate until the early 2000s. Our own Jim Littrell was one of the first executive directors of the task force. While at St. Mary's, Scott and I and others also organized a variety of efforts to assert the interests of the LGBTQ community in electoral politics. One of our first efforts was when Scott, myself, and others, using St. Mary's and the Christian Association as a base, organized to support Lucian Blackwell, a black pro-gay city council person, in his run for mayor in 1979. That effort, called Gay and Lesbian Friends of Lucian Blackwell, was the subject of an article in the newspaper, which caught the attention of Henry Nicholas, the legendary leader of the Hospital Workers Union. I'm told Nicholas reached out to Scott first to ask him to come work for the union, but since Scott had other plans for his future, he referred Nicholas to me, and that's when I left St. Mary's to take a job at the union, where I stayed for about 8 years. Finally, it's no exaggeration to say that the support of St. Mary's and the Christian Association for LGBTQ rights in those early days led to the creation of a movement that eventually won the adoption of one of the nation's strongest LGBTQ rights bills in 1982, and many more years helping to build and strengthen the LGBT community throughout the city. My time at St. Mary's taught me a lot that has served me well over the years. I remember thinking of becoming an Episcopal priest myself while I was at St. Mary's and speaking to a Franciscan monk who was visiting the church one summer about it. He asked me why I was thinking of becoming a priest, and I remember saying, among many other things, that I thought being a priest, especially with the noticeable black wardrobes and white collars, would let people know that I was a good person and that they could rely on me for help when they were in need. He pointed out that one didn't need a collar to do the Lord's good work, and that was a simple revelation that has sustained me for the last 45 years. Thanks.
Thank you. Jim, you're next.
Oh, well, David and I have had parallel lives in a lot of ways in our time in Philadelphia, well, my time in Philadelphia. David, I think, has always been in Philadelphia. But almost from the beginning of my time in Philadelphia, which, as Nikki said, was when I came to the Philadelphia Divinity School, which was down the street, to learn the ways of, well, can you hear me? Get it closer? Okay. To wend my way into the priesthood, I traveled, well, David and I traveled similar paths in some ways, and often were in the same room at the same time, doing a lot of the same kinds of work that David just talked about. But when I started thinking about this opportunity to talk with you, I think the word, I thought a lot about St. Mary's. I've been associated with this parish since 1967 in one way or another, almost without stop. So it's hard to summarize that in 5 minutes. But I will say this, as I was thinking about the opportunity to talk about activism and service at St. Mary's, what first occurred to me was the word ghost, which was an interesting word, and right behind it came the word music. And not service, not advocacy, not activism, but music. And I wondered about why that was, and then when I was here this morning, I realized why, and that's because this place has always held at its heart what I think of as the music of the spheres. It's expressed that in all kinds of ways, with all kinds of endeavors. But I always thought that what was going on here at St. Mary's, whether it was people trying to evade the FBI agents outside the door by taking sanctuary up there in the bell tower, or people coming here, as I did, as a kind of inquisitive, becoming gay human being, not to pray so much, Nikki, I'm sorry to say, but to dance. St. Mary's had, as far as I know, the very first dance that was not in a bar for gay people. And I came to one very early. And I also, while I was in seminary, was involved with the very first sort of progenitors of putting together the gay and lesbian and queer enterprise in the Episcopal and Roman Catholic communions, Dignity and Integrity, which first met together right here in this space, is my recollection. I remember sitting in that space while I was in seminary. It took me a while to wend my way, not only to the priesthood, but to the fullness of my queerness. David and I think both went through a period of heterosexuality. My former wife, I think, well, I'm going to get to that. My former wife and one of my very best friends in the world is in the room here somewhere today. We have a child together, and she turned out to be, may I say this? Also a queer person. So it was very strange. Anyway, St. Mary's, all the ghosts I thought of were people who have inhabited this place across the years, or who inhabited this space in one way or another. For me, those ghosts include the bishop who brought me into the church, Bob DeWitt, who was a ferocious advocate for the rights of particularly of African American and black people in Philadelphia, and who did not spend too much time in his office, but did spend a great deal of time on the streets. When I went to see him, because I didn't want to go to Vietnam, he said, maybe you ought to go to seminary, and that's how I began to be a priest. And he said, who knows, maybe you'll end up liking it, or maybe you'll feel called. And eventually I did feel called into the priesthood, all because I think of my connection with people here at St. Mary's, including the aforementioned John Scott. But there are all sorts of other ghosts, some living and some dead, who inhabit my brain now because I was associated with St. Mary's. I was hired after a period of time by David and Scott and others to do that first directing job at the Lesbian and Gay Task Force, I just literally come out. I didn't really know what I was doing, so that didn't last too long, but it was a great piece of work. And we, while I was doing that, began the work that ended in that legislation David talked about, which endeavor was to get the University of Pennsylvania to adopt a non-discrimination piece of legislation into its charter. And that happened, and I think that moved the effort in Philadelphia a long way. And then as a volunteer, I continued to work on that. But it hasn't just been, for me, working on queer identity issues. What brought me to and sustained me to St. Mary's a great deal was the way this place managed to enfold so many people of so many places, so many identities. So when I came back as rector, well, at first as priest for a day a week, and then not too much longer later as rector in 1998 or 9, St. Mary's had diminished greatly. There was hardly anything here. Vanessa was here, and Holman, and there were a few other folks who were here, but it was a hard time for St. Mary's. And the diocese had made a decision to close St. Mary's and St. Andrew and St. Monica and Powelton and move both of those places to the cathedral. We then got a new bishop, Charles Bennison, who was a very strange and interesting person, but he was also very visionary, and he came down one day when I was here and said, it'd be crazy to close a place with 10,000 students within walking distance. That just doesn't make any sense. Do you think, can it be turned around? I said, with some money. He got some money, and thus we are all still here. I don't think that was particularly my accomplishment. It was a combination of a whole lot of people's vision and work. But I will say this, underneath that communion of saints that I'm talking about, there exists a powerful impulse toward an inclusive, active, powerful, serving community. So I never ever thought of myself at St. Mary's as here alone. I was always interested in building community and being part of community, whether I was doing that as a queer man or I was doing that as a person advocating for the rights of others who were living on the margins of this world of ours, or who were being beaten down by that world. Whatever the enterprise, nothing would have succeeded at St. Mary's were it not this lively, life-breathing community. So my hope for the future is that music in my brain, inhabited now by this great organ that we were so involved in restoring, but that music continues to power the community that is here, that in which I guess I think in my kind of weird way, think that is the epitome, that embodies the Holy Spirit. Maybe the Holy Spirit will continue to breathe the life of community into this place far into the future, not for its own sake, but so that the light that shines through these windows may enlighten and enliven the world in which we live, which God knows needs every breath we can breathe of love and service into it. So that's what I got.
Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning, but good afternoon. Okay. I'm so happy to be back here. So I don't have a lot of history with St. Mary's, I guess the past maybe 7 years or 8 years, but I have a connection. And first of all, I started out not thinking, I was an Episcopalian all my life. And growing up, I never heard about social justice, I have to say, till I was in my 50s. But mostly pious purple prose and platitudes, as I like to say, in church. I was asleep during Vietnam. and civil rights, having babies and being married and all that. And then when I was in my 40s, I started working in hospice care and became aware of the indignities that people who had different sexual orientations or color were treated poorly. And that was because the hospice I worked in was the only one in the area that would take people who were dying from HIV/AIDS. And I saw horrible family disruption from such things. So, as a result of that, somehow God sent me to Uganda for a medical mission type to see what kind of hospice services were being given in Uganda. And one was a doctor from Jefferson, and there were some other clergy. And when we came back, we met with John Scott to tell him about what we had learned and just to see what we could do here. And also Roger Broadley, who was at St. Luke in the Epiphany and was also a very activist. And I was like, this is church? This is great. You know, like it just made sense to me. And at the same time, I started working in poorer areas of the city and saw just horrible, you couldn't even imagine living conditions for people and how hard it was to get health care, even an hour of home care for a person. So that really made me an activist in my heart. I ended up at St. Mary's by God's grace somehow. And I think it was my first year here, it was when a prior president was elected, and we were protesting immigration, deportations at Logan Square, and I was thrilled when like 11 people from our church went to that demonstration. 3 of them were Asian students who were visiting here. And they wanted to see and they've been coming to church here, and people from our parish were welcoming them and having them for dinner. I think, I can't remember your name. Joanne, I think you did. You had those students for dinner. And they came here for, the whole time they were here, they were medical doctors, actually. And when they left, I found out they were Buddhist. And I thought, and I still think, it takes my breath away to think that people could come here who were even of another religion, another ethnic group, and feel welcome. And that's my experience of St. Mary's.
Excuse me. Hi, my name's Fiona, and I have a cold. Okay. When I was asked to participate in this panel, I felt very, very reticent. You know, it's wonderful to be, I'm sorry, I'm not talking loud enough, included in this group of incredible people and all of this history, but also I didn't and still kind of don't know that I fit in, but I would like to. That's important to me. That's a goal of mine, so I appreciate being here. I am a fourth-year nursing student at Penn. I have been coming to St. Mary's for 3 years, and I am a member of the vestry. And Penn is going through kind of a difficult time, as perhaps they often are, but I don't know, sort of some national notoriety for the university happening right now, and something that has felt really important to me as a member of the vestry, as a member of St. Mary's, and as a member of the Penn community is trying to make sure that St. Mary's feels connected to what's happening on campus. You know, student ministry is something that feels important to us. And part of student ministry is, you know, understanding what's going on here and advocating for things in line with our Christian values, advocating for freedom of speech on campus, advocating for students' rights to demonstrate on campus. We have such a long history of being active in the Philadelphia community, and something that I really, really appreciate about St. Mary's as compared to other churches that I have been a part of with such a long history of advocacy is a desire to keep it going. I don't know. I've been a member of communities where we've kind of been like patting ourselves on the back. We have such an important history of advocating for this and this and this group. But at St. Mary's, when we talk about our values as a community, when we talk about the actions that we want to take, we're thinking about what our history has been and how we're going to continue to express those values now. I don't know. That's something that's really important to me about being here. That's something that feels really special about this group of people. I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thank you all so much for those beautiful reflections. And what I hear coming out from everyone that I wanted to mention too is there are so many people in the pews right now who are not, quote, up at the front, we could have a panel of 25 people of current parishioners who are working in so many ways to be that good in the world, with nurse advocacy that's been done by Claudia and Janet and others, those who have worked with the Poor People's Campaign, like Sarah, for all the work that we did hear Scott's name, so he could be up here too, just as much as so many others. Those who have worked in refugee education and inclusion, like Holman and his family in the 80s. And so there's just such a rich communion of saints, both, I think, present and past. And so I hear that in, Fiona, what you talked about, of how do we as St. Mary's continue on this work, recognizing that the situation might be different. There may be things that are not quite as maybe a hot button today as they were in the past, but are there ways that we can keep that advocacy for those in need going? So I would love, this is where, maybe we can just go kind of back and forth, is from your time at St. Mary's, I would love to hear a little bit more about what is the role of church, either a specific, particular placed church like St. Mary's, or the role of the big church in activism, advocacy, and service.
Okay, I got my instructions. I'll go first. And I'll speak from the personal, because I think the role of church, local church and the church universal, is to be a standard for grounding people. It's also, hopefully, a place where one can test one's suspicions or one's ideas push against, without being pushed away. And that is peculiar, because it doesn't happen everywhere. And it happened here, that St. Mary's was a force that you could push against, and it would push back. And it can become, metaphorically, a dance. And for me, it was a dance of learning, because there was always the challenge of figuring out the world, testing it, asking about it here, and getting enough of an answer or enough of an encouragement that you could go to the next step. So that's what I hope that the church can be. And I think this place set a very good example for that.
Okay. Going back to what I was saying about, trying to help to connect St. Mary's to campus issues and community issues today, something that has felt really important to me personally is that, St. Mary's as a whole and the church can be stronger and more stable and a bigger presence than I'm able to be as an individual, both because we have strength in numbers and strength in our values, but also because I'm not very brave most of the time. And I don't always feel comfortable. There are so many wonderful people here and so many of my wonderful friends who do feel comfortable standing up by themselves and speaking out for what they believe in. But that's really hard to do and really scary. And having the support of a community is so, so important. We're stronger together. And so, being a part of a group where I know that we share these values and just kind of like pushing us to express those values together, so that everybody is a little bit braver and a little bit safer in doing that is something that's really important to me.
I grew up a Roman Catholic. I went to Catholic grade school and high school, and I have to admit that my experience of church was oppression and trying to catch you out on doing the wrong thing. I think that's the way a lot of Catholic families treated their children back in those days. It was really only when I came to experience St. Mary's that I learned that that wasn't the only way to, for want of a better term, to worship. It seems to me that the role of the church is there's really two primary roles. One is to support individual people, whatever their situation, in being the best they can be as a human being. And the other role is to bear witness to the larger challenges that the community creates that puts pressure on people and discourages people and hurts people. Somebody has to be able to have the courage to stand up and say, this is not the way we're supposed to live. And I think the reality is that most religious organizations concentrate on the individual, and way too few concentrate on the community as a whole, as part of their mission.
Yeah, I just build on that a little bit. As I said, I think that the church, this church in particular, any church, I hope, can begin can always work to be that community that David is talking about, that I spoke about. I think that's essential. The word that came to mind when you asked that question before and now was that it needs also to be a place of sanctuary, I think. There are so many people in this world who need a safe place. And one of the things that St. Mary's has always been for me as a presence here, professionally and also just as a human being, it's been a place of sanctuary. And also, out of that sanctuary has come the other thing I think church needs to be in the world, and that is it needs to speak the good news, which is not the same as, it's not pablum, it's not nothing. Good news, I think, can sometimes be a very powerful and challenging and difficult thing to speak into the world, but I think the job of the church always must be in some way to out of that sanctuary, to go out there and witness to what I think of as the truth. And if people are being massacred or wounded or sent off to be killed in a war or whatever, or sent to a hospice, or declined to be sent to a hospice, for instance, for whatever reason, one of the things the church, because it is an institution, not the one it used to be perhaps, but still a little bit of an institution, can stand for the right in the face of wrong and do that in a powerful way if it wants to, but only can do that out of this community, I think, that is gathered. I know the word now everybody is using is Jesus. I've got to always say which Jesus, but I do look a little bit to Jesus as a model for that, because he's always going inward. He's always seeking the quiet time, the time, the stories anyway of Jesus, always have him being refreshed and then heading right back out into the fray and speaking his truth to all kinds of power. I was raised half Quaker, so I learned at an early age two things. There is that of God in every human being. I still believe that, though it is blasphemy in the Episcopal Church. And I also think the way that you live that, and the church lives that truth, is to speak whenever you can and however you can speak truth to power in love. And that, I think, is the endeavor of the church writ large and small.
I agree with that completely. I keep thinking about Carter Hayward, who gave a sermon about the Episcopal women who became priests, the original 11, and she said, the church should not be afraid to be too political. And I think, we're great at feeding people. We're great at even maybe taking people in, and that's wonderful, and I'm not saying we should stop that. But why are these things happening? That's the policies that we need. I think the church has to have some say in that. And if there's somebody that is taking those policies away, those things that people need to live and live wonderful lives and at least productive lives, then the church is failing. And there's a whole movement now that I see, open our doors. Oh, our doors are open. Our doors are open. But we have to go out those doors and be on the street, I think. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you all. Well, I think, Jim, you led us right into one of the other questions. So we'll give an opportunity to others to pick that one up as well. You talked a little bit about Jesus and his example. And so I'm wondering, for other people, biblical characters, biblical stories, passages in Scripture, examples from the life of Christ that have inspired your own going out of those doors, as Barbara said, and taking the message of Jesus outside a beautiful place of sanctuary. David?
That's a simple question for me to answer. Since I've been a little boy, I've always been enamored of the fact that the prophet Abraham went to God and said, do not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, because there's good people there. And God eventually decided that there weren't enough good people there, so he destroyed it. But the simple chutzpah to be able to say to God, I might be just one of your servants, but that's the wrong thing to do, and to stand up for that. That's been something that has been my center for my entire life.
Thank you.
I practiced this in the car coming over. I'll admit to that, because my friend and passenger, I asked her the question because she's much more conversant with the Bible than I am, and she said Esther. And so we reviewed the story of Esther. And what stood out was the fact that Esther was very persistent in being a Jew, in being who she was, very dedicated. And although I come from, my family has always been involved in social issues and activism of sorts, the empowerment that caused me here in the very alien North, very segregated Philadelphia, to be always who I am, and to not to be hackneyed, but to bloom where I was placed. And where I was placed was in the middle of a whole lot of white people. And I resisted the temptation to find a community where I would see more people that looked like me and were like me, because I felt that there was a need for me to speak truth, to advocate for not just women of color, but specifically women of color, in the places where I found myself. Because one of the things that I discovered here early on was that there was a dearth of understanding and a dearth of passion for half the world who were not white, who were not privileged, right where I found myself working and thrown into those circles. It was it has been a tremendous influence on me to stay true to who I am and to speak from that platform rather than to try and emulate another platform.
I just have a little, I mean, there are a lot of people in the Bible who I, one time or another in my life, have been passionate about. Sitting here this morning, though, I think I would embrace the women in that window over there. I've always loved that piece of glass, and the notion of the stranger in a strange land being taken up and being fed by the crumbs that others have left, and then following out of love one another into hostile territory has always fed me. And I love also the stories of the women of the Bible that don't get told very often. One of the things that did happen when I was at St. Mary's was all of a sudden, out of the blue, there arrived here a little coterie of women who were refugees from another parish in town. And they brought with them music and passion and hope and a certain kind of glory and this intense friendship and spiritual exploration that brought, and music, they brought voices found into this room, literally. And that kind of determination that I see so often in the women in my own life and in the biblical women I've looked at and think I know a little, that's been very powerful for me my whole life.
I guess I would have to say Jesus, of course, right? Bringing good news to the poor and releasing the captives. But I think the thing that sort of keeps guiding me, and I'm awed by the prophets, is the baptismal covenant that we take to seek and serve Christ in all persons, to strive for justice and peace, and to respect the dignity of every human being. And I think if we follow those things, then we need to be out there advocating.
I can just share a passage that has been very influential and motivating for me. It's from 1 Corinthians, which I know is sort of a controversial book of the Bible. But Verse 15:10 is, by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace towards me has not been in vain. And, from the first time I heard that when I was like 11 and I didn't know what to do with myself at all, it just has been, such a constant in my life, and, certainly a constant in my decision making regarding, where I fit in activism and advocacy and service. What I have, who I am, is from God, and what it is enough to do what I can.
Thank you all so much. I'm looking at our time, and I was going to be very mindful, because I know many people have been here a long time already, much thanks to our wonderful choir and worship volunteers. I would like to open it up to our audience and see if anyone has any questions they would like to share with our panelists. So I can bring this mic, and I'm going to give this one to you all, and see if we have any questions or comments from our congregation. Anybody? Yeah. Just a second. Let me bring you the mic so that they can hear it and people on the live stream can hear it, even if we can't see your lovely face.
Hello. I was wondering if one or two of you could speak to not only the individual activism of John Scott that you mentioned, but those of us who weren't here then, could you talk about how John Scott drew upon the community of St. Mary's to become involved during that period?
I can happily do some of that. When I came to St. Mary's, John was the rector. I think he had been probably the rector for 3 years, maybe 4, but not longer than that. John, as I experienced him, worked from the heart. He went where he felt he was needed. As I mentioned earlier, he was very much in the middle of the civil rights activism that was going on. He partnered with Bishop DeWitt. He encouraged this congregation by example. It was join me. He explained why he was going to be involved. He pushed no one, and a lot of people followed him. John was also very involved in counseling then young men about how to become conscientious objectors. He held some of those meetings here. If there was a safe place that he could find on the campus, in his office, he counseled them there. But he was very, very much at the core of being a part of helping those potential soldiers figure out how not to become soldiers if that was their choice. The other thing that I want to share that I know personally about John is that there was a time that St. Mary's, this parish, sent more young people to the seminary than any other church in the Diocese of Pennsylvania. You might say, well, it's natural because people, it's time of people's lives when they are discerning anyway. But it was remarkable. It was remarkable how many young, then it was men, and eventually there were also young women who were in the process of discerning what their career path might be, that came through this parish and went on to become priest. And I don't think that was accidental. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, John was a powerful influence to me in some interesting ways. And all the ways that Nikki's talking about, a little story about John and how I think he worked was in the early 80s, I was a part-time vicar of a little chapel in Grays Ferry, and I had a parishioner there, a gay man, and John had in this congregation another parishioner, another gay man, and they decided they wanted to be married. This was about 1984, 5, I guess, early, before gay marriage was legal anywhere. So I came to talk to John, and we decided we would do this thing. We would marry these two men here in St. Mary's, whereupon we got a godly admonition from the bishop that we should not do this, and that if we did, we would be liable to be tried. The man who was, I think, John's warden at that point, federal judge Stuart Dodzell, said he would not defend us if this happened. That was courageous, I thought. But we decided that we would go ahead and do it, and we would try to work around. We would try to find a workaround, which is one thing John was really good at. He was good at the workaround. Someone said, "You may not do this." He would find another way to get there. So what we decided to do is have a Quaker wedding here. In the Quaker tradition, people marry each other in the company and with the blessing of the congregation and the community, and that is what we did. We did get, I still have my letter of godly admonition. It reminds me every time I look at it of something I saw in David's office when I first met him. He had, I believe, a papal indulgence on his wall, and which let him do all kinds of things that I certainly could never have done. But I think John's, one way that John worked was to find, if he thought something needed doing, he would call the community into this activity with him and find a way to it that involved, he rarely acted alone, involved as many people as could be found to surround him in that endeavor. And it was I never thought of John as charismatic particularly. It was the way he lived his life in that way that I think drew people to him and into this work. And that's a model for all of us to, I think, follow.
Anyone? Oh, yeah, Deacon Beth.
Well, thank you all for being here today. It's wonderful to hear all of your stories. And Deacon Barbara, I so enjoyed and appreciated what you said about the importance of looking at why do we have the problems that we have as a society. And that's something I really appreciate, not only as a deacon, but as a social worker. And so my question to you all, whoever wants to answer, is how can the church be involved in that kind of work, or who do you see that's doing that kind of work already that the church can become involved with?
Let me jump on that for a minute, because that's a really interesting question. One of my first endeavors in Philadelphia was to found this, I think it's mentioned in that little biography. Right out of seminary, John Scott actually offered me a job as his associate, and I turned him down. He told me I was the only person who had ever turned down a job that he had offered. But instead, I went off to do something that we called Voyage House. It was intended to be a kind of countercultural endeavor to bring hope and life and opportunity to people under 18. We never said kids, to people under 18 who were living on the streets of Philadelphia. And it grew into something mammoth, including a high school that was located here at St. Mary's, an alternative high school. But our little motto, which was engraved on our little letterhead, our self-designed letterhead, was, "We do it." And I think the answer to that question is just do it. If you feel called to something, do it.
I think there are plenty of places you can do it. I mean, there's the Poor People's Campaign. It's a big one, and Sarah's really involved with that. Red Letter Christians, that's Shane Claiborne, who makes tools into into plowshares, like guns into plowshares. There are things like that that anyone can do, and there's, you can't do it. It's a big organization I think you have to get involved with. Personally, right now, I'm like writing get out the vote postcards. And I know it's a little, but you said in one of your sermons that even if it's a little thing, it can help. And I think we just have to be out there. I think we have to be out there as Christians and say, this is not right. We really have to actually just do it. Yeah.
If I could just make a quick comment. The fact that half of the American voting population appears to be enamored of a man who calls himself a fascist dictator makes it very clear, I think, what we need to stand for, especially should he get elected.
I kind of want to close this down, honestly. I think you're all wonderful and you've all done great things and you're continuing to encourage us, and there are many people here who are doing wonderful things. I want to go home. I've been here since 9 o'clock this morning, and I want to go home and I want to do some postcard writing and some phone banking. In the next 3 weeks, I'm going to be working as hard as I can, as often as I can, to try to make sure that this country and this world does not go down the tubes. I'm only being blunt, and I know we're not, we can't talk politics here, but you all know what I'm talking about. And I want to go home. And I'm going to go home now. And I thank you all.
Thank you, Claudia. Let us close in a blessing of prayer. Send forth your Spirit, O Lord, and renew the face of the earth. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of all your faithful people, especially those gathered here at St. Mary's, and kindle in them the fire of your love to do the work you have called all of us to do. Amen.